Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a pleasure to see you here and to welcome you at IMD also. My session, which is going to appear very soon, I hope. My session, here it is about the world around us, the business and economic environment in which we are going to operate, and what are the consequences for all of us. Now, it's very nice also to see in the audience quite a number of friendly faces, people which have maybe heard me before. And I have to tell you one thing. In my type of domain of competence, the worst thing that can happen is when you have somebody in the audience who says, "Hey, Prof, I remember very well what you said before." So I hope that you have happily forgotten about everything and that we can start with a clean plate again, because the world is completely different. So let's see what it is and how things have changed. And of course, this was very well said by Winston Churchill, who said one day the following: the challenge today is to forecast what is going to happen and then to explain later why it did not happen. So this is basically what we are going to try to do. And there is no doubt that the world is upside down. We had a cascade of crises, from financial to economic, from economic to social, from social to political. We hope it will stop there. And actually, the name of the game is that the world as we knew it is broken. This we know. The real challenge is to define what is the new normal. What are the rules of the game which are going to be with us for more times, which are going to define the environment in which we are going to operate, and to answer the question, so what? And this is what we are going to try to do together. Now, you may have seen that the world is really split in two. On one hand, we have the governments which have a lot of problems. They are swimming into debt. $36,000 billion of debt in the OECD region. $36 billion of debt is so big that I lose my thing. $36,000 billion of debt is so huge that actually it doesn't mean anything anymore. It's a number, nothing else. And I think this is a problem. We are playing with numbers and not with money anymore. And on the other end, the companies are still doing very well, as many of you have seen. You know, this is the amount of cash we can have now in the US, $250,000 billion in company, $2,480 billion in Europe. The largest company in the world with cash is Apple, $145 billion. This is $12 billion more than the US Treasury. Not bad. Now, of course, the US Treasury, when they need money, they print it, which is a difference. But basically, we are in an incredible situation where the world is split in two. It's also a world with an incredible level of innovations. These are the events, these are the names which have changed our world during the past 15 years. Yahoo, Google, iPod, Cloud, YouTube, the iPhone, Facebook. It has changed our world. And actually, when you are looking at this chart, you can tell yourself, actually, what is surprising there is that practically all those inventions came out of California. And California is bankrupt. Now, this is interesting. All these inventions came out of California except one, the euro. Now, of course, if the euro would have been born in California, maybe it would work better, but that's a different story. So basically, we are having a situation where the world is really upside down, very difficult to monitor. But then you have to ask yourself, how come that the governments have so much spending and debt and the enterprise are doing relatively well? Maybe the answer was found by Ronald Reagan, who said one day the following: government do not solve problems. And then he added, actually, they subsidize them. And it's very true. They are just throwing money at a problem and they pray it will be solved. But that's not the way it goes. So let's see a little bit what we are going to see as a background. As Bettina said, we have something here called the World Competitiveness Center. We have been publishing a book on world competitiveness ranking, which basically for 25 years now, we follow 60 countries. We are using 333 criteria. We work with 55 partners around the world. The only problem is that we have only one winner, so we have one friend and 59 enemies. But still, we are in this situation where we try to look at things. This will be the background. When you will go outside, you will see all the information and an executive summary. So let's look first, what are the burning issues? The first one is obviously that the economy is in slow motion. Let's see what it means, and especially what it means for all of us in a more personal way. It has an impact on the way we finance ourselves. My new diversified retirement plan is 30% hope, 30% wishes, and 40% prayers. You can try, it works, you know. So let's see the world economy today, and let's see where we are in terms of numbers. This is GDP growth rate, 12 months period of time. And we start with Europe, and then you can see everybody is on the left part of the chart. So actually only 4 countries are still growing, the UK, Switzerland, Sweden, and Poland. So this is a relatively disquieting situation for Europe. If we are looking at Latin America, then what we are saying is that it's a very mixed bag. Chile is okay. Brazil is a bit disappointing. I think Brazil can do much more than 1.9%. Relatively good numbers with Argentina. But you can relax, they are wrong. That's just a bit of cooking, nothing else. If we are looking elsewhere, Turkey, India, Russia, frankly, countries that could grow much faster than that. So a bit of a disappointment there. South Africa is at 1.9%. If we are looking at Asia, there is no doubt there is a slowing down. Everybody is speaking about China, 7.7%, but frankly speaking, all of us here, we would take 7.7% tomorrow. I mean, it's still very good. But the impact on other countries is big. Look at Singapore, look at Korea, Taiwan, etc. There is a slowdown in the economy. We all hope that Japan will kick up again. This is important. And one country is missing, one large one, the United States of America. QA1, 1.8%, 12 months period of time. Now, if you want to see if the economy is slowing down, going up or going down, you look quarter over quarter, and this is a situation quarter over quarter. And here, as you can see, China slowing down a little bit, Europe not in good shape, the UK is picking up a bit, Germany, France are not in good shape, but the US, 2.4%. So we hope that the US will pull the rest of the economy, because this is really the only bright spot that we have now. Now, these are numbers, and numbers are a little bit boring, so I want to do it in a different way. I want to show you the World Economic Weather Map in the same way as they show you the weather the morning on CNN. In the United States of America, we have some sunshine with a bit of clouds from here and there, but that's all right. In Europe, it's a mixed weather. On the central part of Europe, Switzerland, Germany, Sweden, nice weather. It's raining on the British Isles, but it's always raining on the British Isles. It's a bit overcast on the south of Europe. It's uncertain in Russia. It is mixed weather in Latin America with the exception of Venezuela. There is a wind of change in Africa. We don't know in which direction, but it is changing. Overcast in Japan, but some sunny spells. I think good news. It's improving in Australia. And then we have a heat wave in Asia, in the Gulf region, but it's a bit cloudy over India. But when you are looking at the world economic weather that way, it tells you a very important message. The world is global, but fragmented. I mean, we are in a global world, but everything is very different. Some countries are risking inflation, some risking deflation, like Japan, etc. Some countries are overeating, some countries are in recession. You name it, you have it. The flexibility of the business model is the name of the game, and that's what we are going to see. And of course, as it was mentioned before by Bettina, the first thing is really the debt. Now, the debt burden won't disappear overnight. There is no doubt about that. Let me show you briefly where we are. This is a debt mountain. These are the countries under 60% of the GDP in debt. Surprisingly enough, in the advanced economy, you have only the smaller nations in Europe. Then you have the one between 60 and 100% of the GDP in debt, the larger nation. And then you have the one which have a debt problem, and you all know about it. So I'm saying it's slow to move, and the first reason it's because no matter how fast you implement the reforms, they take time to show result. This is the US. You know, if all the reforms would be implemented in the US, the budget deficit would still be 3.1% in 5 years from now. If all the reforms would be implemented in the US, the debt would still be 104% in 2017. So actually, you know, it takes time before the result of your action, and this is one of the problems. The second reason is it's too big to move. In many ways, government got used to spend money. In Europe, we have 11 countries where the government is spending more than 50% of the GDP. Once you start to get used to that, it's very difficult to go back, and I think this is one of the big issues we're having here in Europe. So the situation is critical because some countries with money do not want to give money to other countries which are overspending. I was in Berlin recently and I saw a travel agency. I won't show you the picture for privacy reasons, but there was a travel agency and they were advertising the following. They were saying, go to Greece for your holidays. And they added, and visit your taxes. Now, of course, when you have this kind of mindset, it makes things a bit more difficult. And indeed, the key issue in Europe is about the European Central Bank. I mean, maybe is it playing a role at the central bank? If you look at the Federal Reserves, it has been so far buying about $1,600 billion in treasury bonds. Now they think they are going to slow down and the market is a bit destabilized by that. The Bank of Japan is pumping more and more money. This is Abenomics. But if you are looking at the so-called European central banks, it is not allowed to buy treasury bonds and government bonds for the moment. So really we have a bank, which is a central bank in Europe, which cannot play that role. And I think this is making things very difficult. Also, the decision-making process is very difficult in Europe. You know, it's difficult to reach a decision very quickly. Europe should speak with one voice. We all agree with that. But maybe not this one. So we are in this situation that the difficulty to speak and to act quickly is one of the very big problems we are confronted. Now, the third reason is a cascading effect. We are always speaking about debt at the federal level, at the central level. This is the debt in the United States of America, $16.7 trillion. But remember, you go one step down, and California is almost bankrupt. And then you go one step down, and Detroit has $17 billion in liabilities. So it goes down by cascade, and it makes that the problem is much deeper than what most people are thinking. We have the same issue in Europe. If you are looking at Spain, Catalonia, Valencia, Madrid, are all running very big debt problems. And Catalonia wants to become independent. That will help. In Germany, half of the German states are running with debt problems, including Berlin. So, you know, the debt issue is going very low into the system, and this is a very big problem. How do you solve it? Maybe the easiest one is to try to find money through taxes. So let's see where we are now. This is a tax revenues as a percentage of GDP, not the tax rate, and tax revenue. These are the countries which are receiving more than 40% of the GDP in debt. In taxes. These are the countries which are receiving between 30 and 40% of the GDP in taxes. And ladies and gentlemen, there are two countries where the government receives under 30% of the GDP in taxes, and these are Greece and the United States of America. Interesting. The US in 2011 received 24% of the GDP in taxes. So actually, you should not tax too much. But if you don't tax enough, then actually you don't have enough revenues and you have to go into debt in order to pay. And this is a problem we are having today. Some countries need to find some tax revenues. And I think that one of the big issues we are going to see is everything about taxes. The first thing is that government will try to broaden the tax base. This is the FTT in Europe, financial transaction tax, 0.1% on shares, 0.01% on derivatives. This is capital gain tax, etc. It's everything about transparency. You know, tax deduction, tax havens, etc. How can you catch tax offshore money? And then the final one is, of course, multinational taxation. Which large global company pays what and where? You have seen the story with Starbucks, Amazon, Google, and I think we are going to see more and more reform of the global tax system for companies. It will affect everybody. Every one of us in this room will be a very big issue. Number 4 is financing is becoming more and more difficult in this world. Let's see what it means today. The real fundamental problem is that the banks, which are traditionally supposed to lend money, actually are borrowing money on the market because we have put capital requirements, liquidity requirements. This is one of Basel III. Basel III meant that last year the banks in the world had to find $566 billion in order to have the right ratio. So actually the banks goes on the market and they borrow money. And you find yourself with this very weird situation, very well explained here. You have the little guy who's going in a bank and he's saying, I'm here to ask you for a loan. And the bankers say, well, that's funny, me too. And this is the world upside down. And this is a world where we have to find something else. And the question is, are we overreacting? Because are we putting too much regulation? Basel III actually is 616 pages of exciting financial ratios. If you want to sleep at night, very good. Our friends in the US have done even better. The Dodd-Frank Act is 848 pages. But these are the law. Then you have the rules of application of the law, and the rules of application are 60,000 pages in Europe only, 30,000 pages in the United States of America. How do you survive that? But actually, the good news is that McKinsey has calculated that altogether, this will create 70,000 full-time jobs in Europe. And after people are saying that we are not innovative in Europe, that's wrong. So let's see what it means and where we go from there. You have to keep in mind, in government like in business, there is a tipping point where sophistication suddenly becomes nothing else than complexity. And that's where we are now. We are complexifying the system. And according to Peter Drucker, you should never forget that there is nothing so useless as doing efficiently something that should not be done at all. And today we are doing plenty of things simply because we do them well, but nobody needs them. And that's a very big issue. And I have the feeling that sometimes we are killing the objectives. All of us in this room, we are downloading programs on the internet, right? And whenever you are ready to download, appears this screen, terms and condition, decline or accept. Do you read it? Never. Do you accept? Yes, you push the button and you accept immediately, and you are right not to read it. Because if you would read them, you would spend 250 hours per year reading this nonsense. We just don't have time. So actually, you go in the other direction. You are supposed to inform people, but you disinform people. And I think this is very much in line with what President Truman said one day. He said, if you cannot convince them, he added, then confuse them. And that's exactly where we are. We are increasing the level of confusion all over the place, but we don't help people. The next big issue is going to be shadow banking. Now, you know, we over-regulate the normal banking and financial sector, but we forget that on the side of it, you have shadow banking, $67,000 billion, institutions which are not banks, but which are performing banking operation. In the emerging markets, you know, they are giving credit above 20% a year. And I think this is a real time bomb, and I think that people are going to address that very quickly. So let's go now and see austerity. Only one slide, do not worry, but I want to show you something interesting. We have looked at austerities as a moving target. You know, everybody said this is a debt level in 2008 of these 5 countries. Everybody said this is not acceptable. Let's put austerity measures in place. Well, congratulations, after 4 years of austerity, the debt has increased. Why? Because the GDP has gone down faster than the debt, so the ratio between the two has increased. And our friends in Greece have the feeling they are turning into a circle, because the more you make austerity measures, the more actually the ratio increases and you destroy your economy. I think we are going to make a pause, and I think that we are going to let those people breathe a little bit in order to recover with the economy. Let's look now at the game changers. We have seen the burning issue. We go at the game changers. What is going to be so different in the world? Number one, the money is elsewhere, and let's see where it is. Something important happened during last year. If you take the BRICS, actually, these are the foreign direct investment going from the world to the BRICS, $263 billion. But very interestingly enough, this is the money going up from the BRICS to the rest of the world, $126 billion, which means more and more money is going the other way into the rest of the world from the emerging economies. This is a multiplied by 15, very interesting change in the world economy. And of course, it comes from the sovereign wealth fund, it comes from the foreign currency reserves, and this is really changing the picture of the world. This is where is the money. This is the so-called old money. This is an update. The US has very little foreign currency reserve because the world is in dollars. Then you see Europe, you see Switzerland, and you see Japan. This is a new money. This is a new money, which means, of course, China number one, as you know very well. And then you have Korea, Russia, Taiwan, India, Saudi Arabia, and Brazil. Altogether, those 7 countries are managing $6,000 billion in foreign currency reserves. That's where the money is. So if today you are a president of the prime minister of a country, what do? You take your phone, you call our friends in Qatar, you call Beijing, and you say, how long has it been since I told you how much I love you? And the name of the game is to recycle the money as quickly as possible. But there are very different priorities today. The first priority is the purchasing of assets. You use the money to buy companies. It was in Africa, 700 Chinese companies operating in Africa, Latin America. Now it's Europe. It's going a lot into Europe. You have seen the latest rumor. Huawei is discussing the possibility to buy Nokia. I think this shows how much the world is changing. But I think a lot of the money will go in financing the globalization of local and domestic companies, using this money to have global players again. And I do believe that one of the biggest revolutions in the world economy today is the emergence of new brands. Those brands which are hitting the market now, which we didn't know many years ago, like Haier, which has become in 10 years the largest companies in domestic appliances, largest one in the world, passing over Whirlpool in the US. It's going very quickly. It's going very quickly in the financial sector also. New names, new players. You will see in the OWP program, we have a lot about those new players because they are changing the face of the world economy today. And actually, we estimate there is about 1,000 firms today coming from the emerging economies which have a revenue above $1 billion and which can be qualified as global companies. We need to know them, to partner with them. We need to have a better understanding of what's happening, because what is happening very quickly. These are the 10 largest construction companies in the world today. 5 of those are coming from China today. 10 years ago, 5 of those were coming from Japan. So it shows you how quickly this is changing. There is another way to look at it, is to take the Financial Times Global 500 companies. And what you can see is that between 1950 and 2007, you had from the US 52 new entrants, from Europe 12 new entrants. During the past 10 years, we had 22 new entrants from China in the largest global companies in the world. So this is going very quickly, and I think we should really get used to what's happening here, and we have to know these companies very well. Are you still alive? Yes. Good. So let's move to consumers now and see what's happening. Consumers consume differently. You have 2 types of consumers. You have what I call a replacement economy, which is basically an economy which you have in Japan, in the US, and Europe, where you buy a product to replace an old one. I buy a cellular phone, I have one. I buy a TV set, I have one. Which means that for non-essential goods, when you have a period of economic crisis, you can stop buying for 1 full year without experiencing a drop in your standard of living. And that's what people do. They just freeze, they stop, they wait, and nothing happened, so they are still happy, which is a catastrophe. And then you have the rest of the world where it is a first buy economy, where you move from nothing to something, which is basically the emerging market, and where you give money for people, they take the money and they run away with it and they buy something. And that explains why the consumer rate of spending is so big in the emerging markets. And what you will find, therefore, is these 2 types of economy. On one hand, you have an emerging market, an economy of I need it. And on the other hand, you have in the advanced market an economy of I want it. I need it, I want it. Best example of this is what you have in your hand is the iPad. When the iPad came, nobody said, I need an iPad. But, thanks God, we had Steve Jobs who came and he said the following: with the iPad, it will simplify all the tasks you never had to do before. Have you noticed? So actually you were told, you don't need it, but you want it. And you say, I didn't know that I wanted it, but since you tell me that I want it, I buy it. It's new marketing technique. And this is very correct, because George Bernard Shaw said one day, actually our necessities, our needs are few, but our wants are endless. And the world is moving slowly into managing the want of people and less what they need. And I think it's a major change in the world economy. We have, of course, in every economy, what you need to have and then what is nice to have. You can pay for it by wealth creation. That's a nice way. You can pay also for it by credit creation. It's a very risky way. And the difference between the two is called debt. I think the problem we have today is that a lot of debt in the world is incurred by nice to have buying and not by needs to buy. And I think this is going to be something which will be with us for quite some time. So to summarize here, where we have been on the consumer front, you may remember in the year 2000, the name of the game was shop until you drop. You remember that? Shop until you drop. Well, ladies and gentlemen, congratulations, it's done. So we have a social time-bound clicking with all that, which is basically, if you are looking at unemployment, this is where we are around the world, 12% in Europe, 7.6% in the US, 26% in Spain. Very dramatic. Even more dramatic is youth unemployment, which is about twice the size. But when you can see in the US 15%, 23% in Europe, 55.2% in Spain, almost 59% in Greece. I mean, if we don't provide jobs to the younger generation, we have a hell of a problem on our hands. It's not anymore economics, it's social, and very soon it's politics. So here we have to be very careful. We need to find jobs to those young kids, otherwise we have a hell of a problem. In this world, the world is changing. Let's look at the market change. And I want to share with you something which is updated every quarter and which is made by the United Nations, which are the market prospect in 2050. And to show you that 2050 is tomorrow, in a generation from now, I want to take you a generation ago. And a generation ago, this is how it looked like a generation ago. Who is it? That's correct. This is President François Hollande from France. You better get used to him, huh? This is how she looked like a generation ago. Who is she? That's right, Chancellor Angela Merkel from Germany. Nice, huh? This is how we look like a generation ago. David Cameron from the United Kingdom. This is how they looked like a generation ago. Bill and Hillary Clinton. This is how we looked like a generation ago. President Obama of the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, tell yourself, when you are looking at these pictures, in life, everything is possible. I have to tell you something for our Spanish friends. I have also tried to be comprehensive and find a picture of Prime Minister Rajoy from Spain. I could not find any. Actually, he was never young. He was born like that, you know. It was something extraordinary. This is the world today. The world today, North America in 2050 plus 100 million people. Latin America 2050 plus 160 million people. Europe, flat. Africa in 2050, plus or minus? Plus, fasten your seatbelt. Plus 1 billion. You know what will be the third largest country in the world in 2050? Nigeria, precisely. Extraordinary. Asia plus 1 billion people. Quite extraordinary to see how the world is changing. Within this, you have to ask yourself, what does that mean on the workforce? Well, in 2050, when the alarm clock is ringing in the morning, actually 247 million people will go to work in the US. In 2050, when the alarm clock or something else is ringing in China, 870 million people will go to work. In India, 1,900 million people will go to work. Give you an idea of the workforce. But if you are looking at Europe, it's just collapsing by country because of demography, because of the retirement age. So you ask yourself, how can you matter if you don't have enough workforce? And I think this is really the challenge for the future. Africa, as we have seen, is really a key thing for the future, and we should have Africa on our radar screen. Africa, 100 companies with a revenue above 1 billion, 20 with a revenue above $3 billion. Africa altogether is the 5th largest economy in the world. The problem is that it is not together. But there is something I want to show you which is even more extraordinary. Somebody has redrawn the map of Africa, and if you redraw the map of Africa by size, you can fit inside China, India, the US, and all Europe, including the UK. But that's quite extraordinary because the size of this continent makes it essential for our future. And the business models, therefore, will need to adapt. Those various markets are very different to growth engine. The first one is the emerging middle class, people above $10 a day, motivated by success, by consumption, and by money. And then you have, and this is new, the emerging less poor, between $2 and $10 a day. They are not in absolute poverty, but they are not yet in the middle class. And we need a new business model for them, and that's why you have the $35 tablet by iCash in India, the famous Tata Nano car in India also. That's why you have microfinance and microcredit, and that's why you have mobile money. Mobile money was not invented in the US, was not invented in Europe. Mobile money was invented in Kenya. And actually, you have to reinvent your business model because the world is different. I've taken here Africa, some countries, and this is a percentage of people in those countries which have a bank account. Everybody is under 50%. And this is a percentage of the countries where people have a mobile phone subscription. Everybody is above 50%. So you use a phone as a means of transaction. And once you have seen that it works in Africa, you start to say yourself, it could work in Europe and the US. And that's exactly what we are saying today. It's going in every direction. Then in the business model, we have the question about who is making what. Because if you look at value-added trade, not by origin, you look at the foreign content, according to the World Trade Organization, 40% today of the Chinese exports in electronics were not made in China. They were assembled. If you look at our friends in Germany, 35% of a German car today was not made in Germany, but elsewhere. So we have gone into a model of outsourcing which makes that the products are made in the world. They're not made in a country. They are made in the world. And that makes it very difficult to understand how the world is functioning. We have gone very far in outsourcing things. This is a little kid who is telling his mother, I got top grades. I outsourced my homework to a kid overseas. And I tell you, they do it. You better check what they do with a computer. Deindustrialization, therefore, becomes the name of the game. If you are looking at the US, the UK, and Japan during the past 20 years, they have lost 20% of their industry. So this is quite significant. Actually, on a world basis, everybody has been losing a share of manufacturing, with the exception of Germany. Germany is the only large country which has gained the same share in manufacturing. There is no competitiveness without industry. There is no competitiveness without manufacturing. I think we start to rediscover what has been a very big truth. And we need to make the link between competitiveness and employment. These are three big success stories. Thomas Edison at General Electric, Henry Ford at Ford, and Steve Jobs at Apple. This is a market capitalization of GE and Ford last week. This is the number of people employed by Ford and General Electric last week. This is a market capitalization of Apple last week. And you know it was above $650 billion, so it went down. It's still very high. And this is a number of people employed by Apple, only 61,000. So basically, you have a situation where you have a huge business model which is not creating employment. And this is one of the big stories and the big debate today. And one day I summarize the situation by saying what you can see here is jobs without jobs. Jobs without jobs. It's a good one, huh? Jobs without jobs.